to another episode of the Best Book Club. I'm your host, New Fatora, and this is the podcast where I discuss the best stories with the best minds in the community. On this episode, I'll be discussing Anne on Manhattan by Fai Jinho, however you say the name. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. With me, I have Hans Gutherson. Thank you for joining me.
So glad to be back talking about a pretty unknown and incredibly short story.
Absolutely. And one that was part of my beginnings in creating content in this community.
Mm,
So,
nice.
I'll start with a summary. A girl moves from Brooklyn to Manhattan to live with her brother and his friends, teasing the very beginnings of wild antics. There's really not much to go off of there, so I had to. I guess it won't rank very highly in my list of summaries.
I liked it though. It's
Yeah.
accurate,
Yes, it is.
100%.
Yes. So this was first posted on April 17th, 2015 on Lucky Fetish, and currently on in its reposting, it has just under 4,000 views. And I don't remember much from the original posting of the story, except that it had a lot of potential, and it was pretty hard to follow at points because of the broken English, and the main character, Anne Hughes, was originally 15. And so
Yes.
multiple people were quick to jump on that underage character. And so after I
Mm-hmm.
messaged Fai Jinho about helping edit the story, he reposted it 2 days later with all overage people, which is
Yeah,
a very, very good thing.
for sure.
Yeah. Um, and so, as I said in the beginning, this was the first thing that I worked on in my creating content for the community. It was uh, I, the writer Fajinho reached out to he just posted out to the community, hey, um, if anybody would like to help edit this, then please send me a message. And so I was one of those
Mm,
people, and
yeah.
I remember working at one of my first job, working at a restaurant, and on my phone editing the story. It was such a horrible way to do it. Um, yeah, it's really showed me how far I've come in editing.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was such a pain in the ass. Because it really is not
Mm,
a super long story, but trying to go through it on a tiny screen, because phone screens even back then in 2015
sure.
weren't that huge. It
What kind of
sucked.
phone was it? Do you remember?
Some lower end of an Android, not like the mainline
Okay.
Galaxy
Yeah,
S
yeah, yeah.
whatevers, or but just some kind of Android.
Yeah. Like
I'm
like a BlackBerry or something, or like
no,
like
no,
it
no,
had a
no,
keyboard or something. Nothing like
no.
that.
It was a legit touch screen. It was just
Oh, okay,
small,
okay, okay.
just small.
Yeah, because I'm thinking back in oh yeah, 2015. Yeah, I would have had, I guess, yeah, iPhone touch screens. I was writing on that. Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Because I was thinking back, I was in high school, we had like flip phone. I was
Hmm.
like, yeah, nothing. There's no way you do anything on that. I was just like,
Yeah,
yeah, okay, interesting,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, it was maybe the first phone I bought. It was I had to buy everything myself. I was never
Mm,
didn't wasn't just given the shit that the some people get.
yeah,
So um, I had to work
yeah.
with what I
Wouldn't
got.
that be
So
nice?
yeah,
Yeah.
but anyway, the title Anne on Manhattan, it feels like the name
Mm-hmm.
of a TV show, like a sitcom.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Are there any other stories that you can think of that sort of do that? Their titles feel reminiscent of a different medium.
That's a good question. I mean, there's so many that you could just look to randomly and say, "Oh yeah, I could see that." Stuff like that. Even like fortunate events. I mean, titles like that. There's a lot that feel like good book titles too.
Mm,
But in terms of like TV stuff, even we have more recent examples like the Haynes sisters. That could be a like a franchise of movies too.
yeah,
Titles like that, or like that's what I was kind of hoping to go for with some of the stories I recently did. It's like what sounds cool? Like they could
yeah.
be series or they could be movies or
Hmm.
something like
Oh
that.
yeah.
Um even some other ones like Fairy Tale of New York. Apparently, New York is somewhat popular in the community for some reason, but I guess it's a lot of American people or people outside of America, which I believe Faizenho is. I think they're from Brazil, based on more recent posts they made. So you know New York if you don't know anywhere else,
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny
which
that
makes sense.
recently I asked him why Manhattan if he's not from America,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Well, I figured that would be an easy way to relate to readers." So, yeah,
Totally.
uh,
Yeah, so right. Absolutely great point that they
yeah,
make.
and
100%.
I feel like New York is such a gravitational point to us, sort of in the same way that it is to comic books, and I think the connection there should be pretty evident in the fact that like so many people make their brands and their livings off of superhero characters and fan fictions and whatnot. Eh, New York and cities like that are just like so iconic, I guess, and so they stand out. They're
Yeah, it
just like
is.
immediately
Yeah.
recognizable as opposed to a place like um, I don't know, uh, like Cedar Rapids,
Like, yeah,
Ohio, whatever
Cedar
it's
Rapids,
called.
Michigan or
Y-
something. Is that Cedar?
Yeah, or
Yeah, or
Kalamazoo,
somewhere. I'm
Michigan,
trying to
just
think of some.
random.
Yeah, Kalamazoo.
Yeah,
Somewhere really obscure. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. Yeah, if you name some random place, it's not gonna have the same effect. I mean, New York has such a power, right?
mhm,
What's the expression? If I can make it there, or if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
right.
And like that
Which is,
quote takes on its own life, And I think Frank Sinatra did a song famously, and
oh
I
yeah,
mean, I think
Jay
always when
Z,
I think of that quote, I think of Hercules. And yeah, New York state of mind, right? And like in music, it's this place that obviously has a great culture and roots, and it's near Canada, so we obviously think about New York and like where I am in Toronto. It's like New York is so similar to us in a lot of ways, and
yeah,
such obviously everybody knows Times Square, as you mentioned. In comic books, it's taken on this like home of like of all the Marvel characters ever, and
yeah.
that's where they all are, and
And
like
somehow they
so
never
it's
meet
definitely
up.
has a power. No, no, never when you need them to have fight the same criminals. No, they're busy. They got jobs and lives,
Yeah,
secret identities. So yeah, it has a great power. So it's interesting. I meant to check like if New York was even more prevalent, but even just recently looking, there were a couple like those two examples off the top of my head. And I think didn't you set like the dangerous games we played as in New York mentioned in there or something like that, and I
probably.
feel
I
like
don't
it does
remember.
pop up. Like looking through old stories, you can see it does show up a fair bit, a kind of surprisingly
Yeah,
high number of times. So it is a place that interestingly has a place in the community, maybe more than any other city if I had to guess. At least on Lucky Fish forums where this story was posted.
right, right, right. Yeah, it is an exclusive, but I gotta. Oh, that sentiment. I think Frank Sinatra was the first one to say it in whatever song it was, but that if I can make it here, I can make it anywhere. I think it's just so much of it is. I think it's kind of bullshit. I think
Yeah,
it
it's funny.
it kind of
It's
takes.
bizarre because he was making
I
it.
feel like it kind
But
of
yeah.
takes away some responsibility of the people to do
Yeah.
to make themselves better. And I'm
Mm.
here, so I must be doing great. But anyway,
Yeah, and he had some issues. I mean, we could do a whole Frank Sinatra podcast. It's funny because he was an actor, but at least in acting, he was kind of a jerk, I think. He's like,
really,
oh, you're supposed to be a hero and great singer, but he's really a jerk to work with, I think. And
wow,
there's like a famous journalism story of how an interviewer wanted to interview him, but he just refused, and so they had to write this really famous interview all about him, all about his life, without chatting with him once because he just wouldn't allow it. But he was like,
wow,
I think he also had ties to mafia, all this other stuff.
yeah,
Crazy. But
yeah,
I don't know why I'm taking us on a tangent. I apologize. This is a wedgie podcast,
yeah.
not the Frank
Who
Sinatra.
cares? Who cares? It can
But
go.
yeah,
It's conversation.
it's just interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
it has definitely these deep roots, New York, across culture, across music, across film, comics, etc. So it's cool to place it there, and it's certainly when you read that tale, 100%. Every time I read Anne on Manhattan, I think this could be a series. Like this could be a
Oh yeah.
TV show that you see on channels like CW or something,
Hmm.
or the network that New Girl. I forget which one that was. And it's like I would
No idea.
100% see that on there, and I would watch Anne's adventures in
Yeah.
Manhattan and
Oh yeah.
like the shenanigans that you mentioned, 100%.
Yeah, like a slice of life type of thing. It's I could easily see it going like that. Um, and I guess just to wrap this tangent up a little bit. I mean, you have these immediately recognizable towns and cities like New York, but then you have ones that
Yeah.
are made famous because of and well known because of the media that uses it, like The Office with Scranton. Nobody would have gave a fuck.
Yes.
Nobody would have known who
Yes.
Scranton was, but then
Yeah.
big
That's
TV
been
show
huge.
uses
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so it's
That's what we need. We need a wedgie story that can do that for some very obscure place and just
yeah.
make it the place to set stories, and everybody wants to go there in the community.
Yeah, it's a case of life imitating art. And I think that's I think that's where at least a lot of the power of art comes is shown. Um, is when life imitates it, as opposed to art imitating life, which seems to be most of the time with our
Yeah.
content. Now, it's sad to say, but something of note is that this is one of the only stories left untouched by the PHP update that destroyed Lucky Fetish.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess it's sort of a melancholy thing then, because hey, at least this one's still safe, but it's one of
Yeah.
the only ones that is.
Magic.
Yeah, which is a very good thing because it's exclusive to Lucky Fetish. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I'm curious how you feel about stories giving an outline of the characters before it starts.
Yeah. I don't love it. I've never loved it because whenever stuff like I see like that, or I see even kind of like character sheets, I've become more like favorable to them. Um, but I know when I first started, I was really against like anything like this because I was looking at the stories and writing as like they have to be as close to books as
Yeah.
possible, like books you would read in a store. Stephen King never made a character page with a name and age and summing up her personality. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, why would you do that? Why don't you like unravel that to me as I go and reveal these things? Like throwing it out here feels like a more lazier way of doing it, where you don't have to show any of this detail. You don't, and it's not
Mhm.
even lazy. That's a harsh and overly critical way of looking at it. I mean, what you're doing as a writer is you're kind of you're cutting yourself off at the feet in that you have a lot of cool details you can put into a story, but how do you do it in a way that's like surprising and interesting when you've already laid out like every detail or a bunch of details about the character like from the very beginning before you know anything about them, before you have a chance to connect with them or hear their voice or anything? It's like here's all the stuff you need to know, or
Yeah.
here's the stuff we think is important for you to know when you start.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but wouldn't it be cool if instead of just telling me she loves rock music, you can show that? Instead of saying Henry's like so great and he dates a lot of girls, can't you just tell me that later? Which you do. So it's like, is it repetitive? Is it like unnecessary to have it more than once?
Mhm.
It's a lot of questions like that. And to me, I've never been a huge fan of it. I certainly understand when you're nowadays, after having made a bunch of characters, seeing sort of people trying to make these brands and franchises out of them in more recent years, the value of something like that, like a quick reference, and you're able to gather some key info about a person and hop into their story. And if Anna Manhattan is going to be this wide, broad story where she's doing all these adventures and she's meeting a ton of characters, something like that could certainly come in handy. But to start setting up with the two characters and the details, I'm not a huge fan of the approach, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. It sort of kills some of the mystique and discovery that you come into brand new
Yeah,
stories with. I
that's
mean,
true.
really, I didn't think of like character sheets or anything like that as counting as part of this, but I mean, really, the only one I could think of with just giving sort of an info dump slash exposition in the beginning
Yeah.
is The Getaway of a Lifetime by Ashley, and that has
Mm.
35 characters in the same way as Anna Manhattan does, just given a little
Yeah.
blurb in the beginning, and it is so
Yeah.
overwhelming. It can be a little interesting
Yeah.
to just like you get a taste of these characters before you're actually introduced to them. But I'd much
Yeah.
rather, just like as you said, I'd much rather find out everything in the actual story. You know, I
Yeah.
feel much more invested and engaged when I'm the one pulling the details out rather than being told what these characters are
Yeah.
about.
Totally. An interesting approach might be, you know how some fantasy books, I guess Lord of the Rings being an obvious example, but I was thinking of like Ted Williams and some of his books, Dragonbone Chair and some of those series. The Last King of Ostenard, being awesome series he's writing now. They have at the back of the book like character very brief, incredibly brief, like one lines about who a character is, something like that. And it's helpful there, obviously, in these epic fantasies where you get tons of characters and you're often
Yeah.
dealing with a bunch of multiple storylines that are taking part across like an entire continent and at the same time. So there it can be really helpful. Um so something like that could be good, maybe, if you have a lot of characters. If that's not the case, I think most of the time you can get away without that. I mean, I certainly get it as a technique if you're like, I want you to know what the character looks like. I don't know how to put it in. For example, I'm scared you're not going to know these things about them yet. It's a shortcut, definitely. But certainly, I think it's probably unnecessary in most cases.
Yeah, I actually just thought of like manga does it consistently in every volume. They
Yeah.
have just a little, but it's just a picture of the character's face and their name.
Mm.
Very, very rarely they'll be like a tiny little blurb, like a couple of words. Like, this is the main character or whatnot. Like it should go 100%. But
Yeah,
um,
it's an interesting tradition that does go back to when we think about Shakespearean English, when these famous pieces are written as plays to be acted. So you have on that first page like the name of the character and
yeah,
who
that's
they are
true.
basically in the story. So like there's a purpose for it there if you want to foreground it, and if you're doing something literary like that, if you're doing a play, and I still want wedgie plays, we haven't gotten them, people aren't writing them, and I'm sad. That would be totally, I would be totally fine with that if you're setting it up, because oftentimes in like a play, if they're good, you don't get that exposition, right? It's not built around laying out what a character, who they are, and what they're feeling. What you get is their dialogue, which has to, and
And the
their
body
actions as
language.
well, that has to communicate. Yeah, exactly. And in a case of something like a Streetcar Named Desire, famous play, Tennessee Williams, right? I think. That's a famous one where it's
Yeah.
very subtle, incredibly subtle, very easy to miss. Like I never caught a lot of stuff about how animalistic one of the characters are until I read that a couple times. And that spelled out to me. It's like look at some of these words being chosen. This person is very animalistic. And you see that play out in a lot of the stuff they do. So things like that where you're trying to get a very brief idea of them to start and then you're gonna lay it out but not very like clearly, if that's the right word, later on, you can certainly say here's who a character is in basic terms to start.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I would love some wedgie plays and people to try that approach and maybe find a way, yeah, to do this sort of foregrounding with character details, character sheets, etc. to start off. I mean, it's certainly helpful as well in terms of like we crave visual stimuli, especially in these sexual medium of wedgie fish literature. Like we need something visual to get off to. That's just how men are too, more than
Mhm.
women. We crave something visual to get us off. So seeing right away what they look like is helpful in that way, But when you're trying to get into a story and enjoy it, it really does kind of undercut the efforts in some ways, it feels like.
Yeah, and I remember being forced to for English class back in high school. We had to read Streetcar Named Desire. I thought it was terrible.
Yeah.
I did not think it was a classic. I didn't think it deserved to be a classic at all. But
Yeah.
um, I think it works really well in plays when you do that, because plays aren't meant
Hmm.
to just sit down and read them constantly over and over again. They're meant to be this
Sure.
grand uh, visual spectacle that you're watching maybe once or
Yeah,
twice, um, and so having that in that context, I think, can be very helpful. But if it's something that
totally.
you're reading, like a story or a book, or a movie that you're rewatching over and over again, I don't think it's really necessary.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing with like a play script or I don't even just the play, the text, I guess.
The script, yeah,
Uh, it's meant for the actors. It's meant for them, and
exactly.
so they understand who they are on enough of a level that they can get into it. You give them, okay, your character is a man of the house or whatever. And if he's Stanley, for example, in Streetcar, or if you're Macbeth, you are like the prince who wants to be king, kind of thing, or lord who wants to be king, etc., etc. So you give them the tiny bits, and you say, okay, this is how I have to play it, and then who I am generally, and then as you go, you get to reveal some of that through dialogue. Because there are no moments in plays that I know of where it's like, now let me. Well, I guess you get monologues where they might say, "Here's who I am," and blah blah blah. But a lot of times you don't have that exposition. You don't get some of that. So like you need to be able to foreground it really quickly and simply and briefly so you can get into the actual story and stuff. In a case like an Anne on Manhattan where it's clearly character development is said to be a focus by the writer, and it feels kind of like that because there's a lot of time spent talking about her interests and things already. There's certainly, it feels like, no need to foreground it with here's everything you're just about to read anyway.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And something I didn't think of until reading through the story again for this episode is that Brooklyn and Manhattan are only about 30 minutes from each other. So Anne's life
Mm.
really wouldn't change much, if at all. She could just
Yeah.
take a cab across town to go visit her friends, or just meet
Wow.
up in the middle, walk there. It's
Yeah. I
I
hadn't clicked, yeah. Because
yeah.
whenever I read that, I think about driving to a new destination. I think she's going somewhere far and like super dramatic the way she's going on in the beginning. But yeah, I mean, certainly moving to a new school, the question becomes like how easy is it to maintain those relationships? Are they going to slip away anyway just because you're not seeing the same people every day?
Yeah.
So there's a fear there, and it's understandable, but certainly like she's not going to be super far. Like you take the bus over to
Yeah.
Brooklyn, have your brother drive you, whatever. Not the end of the world. It's going to Manhattan.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, come on, you're living in Manhattan now. Like, what's so
Yeah.
bad about that?
Yeah.
But I can
Exactly. Yeah.
understand I can understand what you're
Yeah.
going for there, though.
Totally. Totally. Totally.
And so I'm curious how much you think then kids' opinions should factor into life changes that families make, like
Mm.
moving to a new location. Do you think it should have any weight?
Yeah. I mean, that's so tricky. It depends how old the kids are, certainly. Um, I mean, it's usually gonna suck for the kids because the
Yeah.
parents are gonna need the money or they're gonna have some other reason, and it's not like they can just leave their kid if their kid doesn't want to go. So obviously we've seen so many movies coming of age usually where they have to move to a new place, and Anna Manhattan is certainly that. Certainly starts with this familiar coming of age story of moving to a new place. Interestingly, like it's not her parents going. It's a kind of weird situation she's in where her brother is going to a school and so for some reason they want her to move out with him
Yeah.
and switch schools in like her final year, which is a bit bizarre. There's not a super, in my mind, super strong reason for her to be doing this. I think at her age, 18 as she is, if she wants to stay home, really, I think she's totally fine to do that, and the parents should probably respect that. In most cases, though, the kids aren't going to have much agency or choice, which is unfortunate. But it does become a thing of like, what's the bigger picture here? I mean, ideally, I think what I'd love to see, just in general, in any of these types of big life changes, is as much discussion as possible with the kids, and using your words and like talking through with Anne this change and why they think it's good for her. She doesn't seem to understand it or see why it's necessary. So I think that's a failure on the parents' part to break it down. Henry seems to have his own reasoning that he thinks it'll get her out of her shell, and have her make new friends because she apparently has none. Um, and just hangs out in her room all day. So, and we don't know how accurate that is. Like, does she have friends? She says she's finally been making a social life for herself. We don't know what that looks like really at all. Like, does she have friends she's leaving? Uh, it'd be good to know that because that would change things. Or if she's got like nothing there. It sounds like she's liking the school she's at. Okay, so I mean, yeah, but definitely like if you can have that conversation as openly as possible and really talk through it and what you hope to get from it, I think that's always going to be best.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. I mean, the only reason that she has is that her parents think it's a good idea. That's it. And
Yeah, that's not good enough reason if you
it
ask me.
it wasn't like super. It's not like Henry had been living in that apartment for super long, but he had already been living there by the time that Anne was being taken to live there. So it's yeah, it is just weird that she'd be shifted to a new place randomly. It
Yeah.
really just feels like it comes out of nowhere, and that's probably where a lot of her frustration comes from. Is just feeling like
Yeah.
this is very random and there's no reason for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we don't get a good reason for it, unfortunately. It might be cool if like, and we'll talk more about where the story could go and things, but if
Mhm.
there's some reason we haven't yet explored for her being moved there we don't know about, maybe the family's dealing with something, or I don't know. Any number of things that explains why her going there is good. It makes
Mhm.
sense. That would be cool with me. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there seems to be a fairly common trope in entertainment and manga and anime, especially,
Mhm.
that gorgeous women go for so long without any sort of romantic or sexual encounters, a lot of the time being their entire lives. Does this actually
Yeah.
hold true to life? Is this
No,
real?
I don't think so. I
Yeah.
don't think so. I think it's very what's the word I'm looking for? It's fantastical, I guess. It's not the best word, but it's
Wish
like women
fulfillment?
as these virginal figures, beautiful, hot women who have no reason to like, because the thing is like they're shown, and Anne is shown to some extent to be someone without desires who only real like interest is a boy. So it's like this very like male centric lens that she's put through, where it's like
Yeah.
sure she likes listening to music, she likes this other stuff, but the only thing that really like brings her any real like change of emotion or makes her blush or anything and gets her excited is a guy, who we don't know much about, named Logan, things like
Anything.
that. But certainly she's virginal, and which makes her kind of an ideal and makes her kind
Yeah.
of perfect, and like she's so new and innocent and naive, and it's like I don't. That's not really how it works. I think
Yeah.
especially nowadays, like women are dating younger. I think, or getting into relationships younger and doing things a lot younger. So certainly feels like kind of way to make them something for men, whatever that something might be, like to make them a tool of men's affection, which is obviously a very familiar trope in a lot of anime. With the women who are just obsessed with the protagonists and love them and
Yeah.
want to be with them, and to the point where like that's their only interest,
Mhm.
and it's obviously not realistic, um, especially in my experience where dudes are simps who want all the hot women. Who
It's
are
the other way
super
around.
unattainable and things. Exactly. Which is the other trope of it. All the nerdy guys where women are super sexual. You know, it's the spectrum of like how do we view women in entertainment. It's like are they unattainable beauties who have never been touched or kissed and are gonna have that new experience. And it's the same in wedgie fish fiction. We see that a lot. We see them as like untouched, and they're getting their first wedgie and things like that. They're learning about sexuality. And the other side of it is, oh no, they're super sexual. They're playful. They're perfect in that way, right? They'll have
Yeah.
sex with the loser guy or whatever. They'll get wedgies from this nerdier guy. They all love him. Like the remote, for example, is this
Yeah.
kind of guy who just doesn't have much going for him. He's got two super hotties vying for his affection. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like that's the dream, and it's
Uh-huh.
super wish fulfillment in that way. So certainly, yeah, we see it play out in wedgie fish fiction too. These familiar tropes, 100%.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think wish fulfillment, I think, is really what is the cause of this. It
Hmm.
does seem to be the case that most of the time it's guys making these things. So, um, they want to have that, and so the only way they're really going to get it is by creating it. I think that's a huge reason why harem manga and anime exists so heavily because of that.
Yeah, yeah, and we get a little bit of that in Lucky Fish forums too. It was I think Bloom225, one of her stories she did with a collaborator. It was called Harem. It had Harem in the title. I'll find it.
The
But
harem
the same
queen.
thing. It was like Harem Queen, right? Where the Bloom character, Peyton, probably, it's usually Peyton, ends up in a harem with a dude. And it's just like a bunch of women.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, this is obviously the dream,
Hmm.
unrealistic, crazy as it is. Um, so certainly, yeah, so many of those tropes because we have a lot of anime fans in the community, and it is this wish fulfillment overlap. Definitely gonna play out
Yeah.
in the community, and there's obviously some notable examples of it. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. So the random switch to a narrator in the middle of that first part threw me, and I think it did
Yeah,
back when I was editing it. I can't remember why it was kept in, but it strikes me as odd when there hasn't been any actual narrator yet, and then this just random one pops in for a second.
yeah, yeah. There's a bit that threw me. Like I'm confused about how long ago the wedgie is from their drive to Manhattan. Like it took me a couple times reading it through and it's still not clear to me how long ago that happened. And now they're here. Like did you know or is it clear to you how much time has passed since that wedgie scene she's reminiscing about?
No, it isn't. It might have been in the original draft that had underage characters in it, and so it might have been that it just had to be taken out um, in order to fall in line with what's good. It might be what it
Yeah,
is.
maybe cuz like they mentioned it was a Tuesday night and she's doing homework or something. But it's confusing because it was like Tuesday, but then we get 18th of August. I'm like, so was it earlier in the month before they're moving? Was it like I don't know? Maybe it was years ago, and so they just removed the mention of it, or he removed it. You caught in the editing. Who knows? But that was something that threw me off. Certainly, it's like it's kind of the story in a way is like framed around this wedgie story. So the framing device is like them driving and them arriving there, and then the story itself is, I guess, kind of this wedgie and the story of how she feels embarrassed around Logan setting up, I guess, and like the next part, her seeing Logan, her being afraid to like approach him or afraid to show her feelings for this guy who's a couple years older because of the wedgie and afraid he remembers it like
Hmm.
and so some of that might become clear as we go
Yeah.
uh but even like in the end where they're like we're here and it's 2 o'clock or something I was like, you can get some rest. You're I'm like, was that what is the time matter? I read that. I'm like, wait, it's 18th then, it's 2 o'clock now. It's like so I was really trying to figure out like a timeline around some of that. I
Yeah.
was curious if you knew all the answers.
No, 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 no. I'm not God's voice here, unfortunately.
Uh,
Yeah.
what happened to the story though? Do you know why it wasn't continued? Since you were
No,
editing it?
at a after a certain point, the Fajinho stopped messaging me entirely. That was it, and I never heard
Did you
from them
get more
for
parts to
years.
edit or something, or was it like
Never,
after the first one?
never. It was
That was
just
it.
that one.
You edited the first part, and then they just stopped messaging you or something.
Yep, yep, yep. Now,
Okay.
recently, we've gone back in contact, but Anna Manhattan is not being continued. I'll say that.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
Gotcha.
yeah. So, in all the stories I've read, I don't think I've ever heard someone's body described as a slide during a wedgie. It's very unique, but I'm not sure that I can visualize it properly. It's a bit of an odd visual,
Mm.
unless they're
Yeah.
just talking about like the shape the body takes. But
Yeah.
it's a bit odd.
Yeah. I guess he's saying she's like on a like a what even is I'm trying to if only I had what's it called when with the angles. Shows you I'm not a math student. I'm picturing her on an angle, like as if you were going down a slide. That's a
Oh, like an
really
obtuse angle.
bizarre angle to get at. Like it's not. I guess it's is it 180 degrees? Maybe.
Well, 180
Uh,
degrees is just a flat line.
yeah. So definitely not. So what's that? That's like I'm trying to think. Maybe not 40 degrees or something. Yeah, 40-degree angle maybe. She's kind of bent over.
Hmm. That'd be an odd slide, though.
It's a very hard pose to get. If she's kind of bent, though, I can kind of picture it. Yeah, it is interesting though that you note
Yeah,
that because yeah, the descriptors, and that's what I'm always looking for. Those ones that kind of catch you, and oh, I've never heard that descriptor before. Never
yeah,
heard that metaphor. So, I think it's a fun one. Um, although yeah, it is a bit like, how does that work? What exactly do you mean? But I don't think that's a bad thing to have
yeah.
that kind of
I,
reaction. As
are
long as
there?
it, unless it makes totally no sense to you,
Yeah.
you're like, what slide?
Yeah. Are there any other ones? Are there any ones that stick in your mind or that you really like? Just
In this
in
story,
other in
I
just
mean,
in
there's
any
stuff I
stories.
like.
In any
Yeah,
stories.
in any stories. I mean, there's some I've written that I was really happy about, but maybe went over the top. Like in Kara's Choice, which it's not one of my more well-known ones. I compare it to that bird thing that dips into water. You know,
Yeah.
it keeps going back and forth, dipping in the water. I was like, there was a wedgie happening, and it was like that. I compared it to that. I'm like, wow, that's nobody's ever compared a wedgie to that before. Um, where's some other examples? I mean, obviously, the super cliche expression "cuts like a knife"
Mhm.
does hold a special place in my heart because it's probably like our first cliche in the community, like one everybody uses. But Sasita is very creative with it. Even some expressions he used, things like I forget what story it was in. It may have been Karate Friends, but I don't think so. Might have been one of his Edging stories where he's talking, a character's talking, and they'll be like, "I'll make you part fabric for a week or something." And I was
Yeah.
like, "That's clever," and that was a bit funny. It made me laugh. So there's always some fun expressions to look for. I'll see if I can find what that one was from,
Yeah. And
and bring it up later.
if
But
I'm
yeah.
remembering correctly, another character, another writer references that
Yes.
in their one of their
Yeah.
stories.
Totally.
It was you. It
Yeah.
was you. You did in Lucy and Daniela.
I did a similar
Yes.
one. I did
No, you said
yeah, I did
as
there.
Saseda, you said something like as Saseda would
Yeah.
say, "Fart fabric."
Yeah.
So,
There you
um,
go. You
but
see? So it
actually,
sticks in your brain,
the
some
one
cool stuff like
the one that really sticks in my head about like unique uh, descriptors is the way you described Daniela getting the first atomic wedgies, comparing it to a
that.
bike.
Mhm.
It's, that was pretty unique, and it's I really like that one.
Nice. Nice.
Uh,
Yeah. It just goes to show you like I love similes, metaphors. I think they're great. I think we should try creative ways to do it. Sometimes I go over the top with them, and people are like, "That's crazy," or "Why do you do that?" But I think they're really fun and a kind of easy way to try to creatively describe something. Because you've probably seen it, and I've been seeing it for years, where writers who will start in the community, a lot of times they'll write a few stories and be like, "Oh, it's too hard. There's how many ways can you describe the same act of giving a wedgie? It's
Right.
impossible to describe more than like a couple ways." And I went crazy when I saw that the first couple times over the years. Now I'm kind of more used to it, and I feel like also I'm seeing that less, which is promising because it means people are trying to be more creative or know there's different ways to do it beyond just saying they gave a wedgie and it hurt. So yeah, but certainly it's something we come up against a lot, and something that can certainly, as I mentioned, just totally stop a lot of writers from writing because they feel like they've done it once they've done it a couple times.
Absolutely, yeah. Something I haven't consciously thought of before, but I've been aware of for a while is that I absolutely love designs like bunnies and the like in writing. But
Mm. Yeah.
in when I actually seeing underwear in art or a video or something, I much prefer plain white or pink. And so
Mm.
I'm curious why you think we as human beings fall in love with ideas so easily and then build them up to be far greater than the reality actually is.
Yeah, I think that's just how we as humans operate. I think we would be too depressed and terrified of life if we didn't have our fantasies and our dreams. And if you want like a deeper examination of that, you can watch the Sandman series on Netflix, or I imagine if you read the comics, it's the same thing. But certainly, when you think about being a wedgie fetishist, the thing we realize and understand pretty quickly, all of us, is that like nothing is gonna be better than our fantasies. We are gonna dream about it. We're gonna build up these moments of wedgies in our head or these scenes. We're gonna picture Anne getting a wedgie from her brother in Anne on Manhattan. And the cool thing about Anne on Manhattan is it is this MF wedgie story, which is obviously a rare subset of stories there. So we're going to build that up in our head. We're going to fantasize about it. We're going to think about being Henry giving Anne a wedgie. Or some of us might picture being Anne getting the wedgie, etc. And we're going to keep thinking about it, and we're going to picture every detail about it, and we're going to think about how amazing it would be and how beautiful the sensation. But then any of us who've sort of gotten a wedgie in real life, we realize how disappointing it is generally, especially when we look back. We're like, that wasn't the end all be all experience. That didn't change my life, or like had me on a different plane of existence for a bit. It was maybe kind of awkward and it ended too quickly and things like that. So certainly we're going to love the fantasies more than reality because reality is ultimately disappointing. As beautiful as it can be and as wonderful, it's never going to live up to the fantasy. So we're always going to hold that in higher esteem. And so things that we may not see every day, but maybe ingrain us in the story because they're a core detail our minds can grab onto, like bunnies on underwear, things like that. It adds to the cartoony element. Your mind can latch onto it as it does these little details that really get you excited. And then while in real life, it's kind of like you probably want I think it's because whatever you're seeing you're gonna be into too. So if you saw a bunch of like bunny underwear or something in videos, which is a lot less common than if you think a lot of porn videos, they're wearing pretty standard underwear most of the time. You might start changing your mind. You go, oh yeah, that is kind of cute when they're doing that. Or if they play into it, if they're wearing like I don't know bunny underwear in a video, but they're playing it very serious and has nothing to do with the video, that's probably not going to hit as hard as a story where it's pretty clear this is a nerdier character and their reactions are more humorous and they're making fun of the bunny underwear, which is very common
Yeah,
when it's themed and things like that. If that makes sense. That was kind of
absolutely.
rambling answer to the question.
Well, and on the topic of Anne and Henry, I really like their dynamic. though it does seem to tread into Henry having a sister complex a little at times, with how touchy he gets and all that. It's
Yes.
a little
Yeah, he's a
creepy.
very touchy guy.
It's the
Yeah, very very creepy. Calling her sweetie,
yeah,
things like that. Certainly older brother teasing. He doesn't cross any crazy boundaries yet, but it's a little. He's on the edge. You know, I want to see a bit
yeah,
more of him to know for sure. He might just be like that annoying older brother. Uh, is just gonna pick on her a bit. And I don't know, like I wonder if that's the whole story, if it's him picking on Anne, like, or what comes next, you know? Like, does she, while in Manhattan, go to a new school and meet some hot bullies or something who pick on her? Is it Logan gives her wedgies and she finds out she likes them, a la Awakening or something like that, you know? I really don't know, like, where the story would go.
mm, okay, yeah. It's I'm hoping that that's as far as he goes with his touching and whatnot, but like
Yeah.
kissing the top of her head and all that. It's like, okay, I mean, I can see maybe brother and sister doing this kind of thing, but it's still like, all right, man, come on now. Especially if you're getting all these women as is described,
Yeah.
I think you
Getting a
can lay
ton,
off for a
yeah.
little bit. Um,
Yeah, yeah, you'd think so, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because a version of the story could go in like, why is he picking on his sister? He's clearly got a lot of stuff made. He seems to be trying to impress these dudes when they're around, so he's probably got some alpha male thing going on that he's trying to do. Maybe he's overcompensating for something. There's the version of the story like I kind of hinted at where something's not quite right at home for these two,
mhm.
and maybe that's what they're escaping from. That's why he's in this apartment 30 minutes from his home when he could just drive to school, um,
Yeah, that's
every
true.
day kind of thing. And he has to in Manhattan. I assume even in 2015, super expensive place to live. That's why he's there with two other dudes, and she has to live in this place with the two other guys, right? Or do I
Yeah,
misunderstand
no,
that? Are they all
she's gonna
cramped
be.
in one place?
Yeah,
It is a kind of very large place, right? It's kind of they said what 2 stories or
got it,
something.
something
He
like that,
describes it
which
as.
would be
It's like a
insanely
it's almost like a
expensive.
house, you know, super expensive. So I mean, if the parents maybe want them out, or maybe that's not, it seems like that's the case. Maybe they're helping subsidize it. Maybe there's something going on with the parents. That's how I kind of read into it. It's probably totally off, but I wonder, and that's kind of maybe what I would like to see, or maybe how I'd write it. There's something going on at home. They've escaped that at least temporarily. Now in this place, but it's probably, I assume, catch up to them, whatever it is. I don't know if
Yeah,
there's something dark happening at home. It could just be a divorce too. It doesn't have to be that dark. Could just be the parents are going through a rough time and the kids are getting away from some of that, you know.
yeah, hmm,
And so Anne's move to Manhattan is like this, certainly a coming of age, but also a chance for her to be on her own for the first time and coming to terms with a family breaking apart and meeting some new family with Logan. I don't know. The possibilities are obviously endless, but I maybe that could be an explanation to the reason they have to make this dramatic yet also a bit odd shift to Manhattan.
yeah. That is super interesting. I never thought of that. Um, maybe I was thinking like something a little, maybe a little, something that could be is that Henry knows about Anne's crush on Logan, and so he's like marking his territory in a way, or like indirectly teasing him,
Yeah.
like, "Look what I can do that you can't," and maybe, or
Mm,
just trying to embarrass her in front of Logan because he knows.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you could just be older brother being annoying, just kind of like getting on their nerves, and it's not clear if he like supports a relationship. To me, Anne's body language, the way she looks away when he smiles, like that probably should tip Logan off that she's into him.
Yeah,
Um, so it feels like it probably wouldn't take him long to pick up on that. Whether he's into her or not, since it's a story, I think we can assume they're gonna get together. It'd be very funny if they don't, though. And like she goes to him, and he's like, "No, I'm not into you." And totally, I guess she'd have to get with the best friend as is classic in these stories, who she never liked until the very end, whatever, whatever. Like the most cliche thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I imagine they should get with Logan, and yeah, no clue like where the story goes though, and how wedgies keep factoring in. I
Right.
mean, I guess it could just be a case of like Henry keeps embarrassing her, and Logan, I don't know, maybe Logan tells him to stop, or they just kind of look. Henry just stops, and he has like an Elizabeth reason from Blood Money for having done all this or something. Who knows?
That could be the case. Um, I, Compared to plenty of other stories, though, and not just on Lucky Fetish, this first part, I guess, really, it's the whole story is what we can call it, rather than just the first part. It's pretty meaty comparatively. Like there's a lot here in the
Sure.
beginning
Yeah.
compared to other stories, which is pretty cool. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's worth the trade off of not having anything else. So,
No, totally. Yeah. No, it certainly is in terms of how much detail we get about both Anne and her brother.
mhm.
Like it feels somewhat balanced, which is also a surprise. Where it's like it could just be but Anne, but we also get details about Henry, and so it's set up like they're both pretty core parts of the story, although most of it is from Anne's point of view.
Mhm.
So interesting brother sister relationship. He's the only other person with dialogue in the story, right? It's just the two of them. I don't think anybody else
Yeah.
speaks.
No,
Two of them.
nobody does.
I don't even think Logan says anything. He shrugs.
He
He might
smirks.
say
That's
something
it. He
here
doesn't
and
say
there.
anything.
Doesn't say a word. So there you
No.
go. So I mean, there's kind of like co-protagonists, which is
Right.
kind of interesting. Um,
Deuteragonists.
I think too, because like when we talk about men, and I've said this a lot, we get a couple familiar tropes. We get the kind of dominating man who gives the wedgies to the woman who's submissive, and most Bloom stories we see that. The Awakening, another example. Here we have like the brother sister thing, and because he's older, I think we can assume Anne's probably not going to give him wedgies back, but that would have been cool if she did. Um, but he's not this dominating, rough guy who's doing it for sexual pleasure, although it is a bit creepy when he's calling her sweetie and stuff. Um, he's mostly just annoying older brother. So it's a bit different in that way, which I think is significant.
Absolutely. Yeah. It makes me think of I think it's the schoolgirl slave and her master. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
where yeah they come home and then they go back to her the female lead's place to help her study, and her brother comes in
yeah,
and annoys the shit out of her. So yeah, I think that's very
yeah,
fair.
yeah. Yeah,
So
the remote, interestingly too. He's the one very hot woman has an older brother who does come in and give her a very sort of brutal wedgie. Uh, so yeah, so we do see that brotherly trope. It's funny because like we can think of basically any scenario where wedgies make sense. Brother wedgie sister, bully wedgies, and like somebody's probably played it out in those gaps where anybody hasn't. That'd be cool. That would be
yeah,
where the next story should be.
yeah, like a war story.
Yeah, certainly. Listen
Yeah,
to the previous episode for more.
yes. So we've circled around it, but now it's time to dive in. How would you continue the story?
Yeah, yeah, I hinted at this a bunch, but very briefly, I'd say I'd probably figure out the deeper reason behind the move. I'd like there to be one beyond her getting out, which she can just do without having to move to a different city. As close as it is, she can join clubs, she can meet new people, she can be more active socially at school that she's at already without having to move. Because you would think for Anne, my guess would she would kind of shut down
Yeah.
and meet people. And it'd be in a worse spot. She'd probably hang out in her room even more. Other than talking with these three dudes. So yeah, I'd like to know what that is. Probably something to do with the family. There's probably some deeper history. Maybe divorce, maybe something darker. Um, it's so open. That's the thing. I guess because of the title and on Manhattan, I see her going around Manhattan, exploring the city. I guess she could go on a bunch of dates with Logan, and I'm just improvising all this off the top of my head. She could see major sights of New York and maybe like start to grow as a person and come out of her shell. Maybe they go to a club. Maybe they just go to like the Times Square. Maybe it's New Year's Eve at one point and everybody's at the ball counting down because it's a big New Year's New York tradition. I mean, that's even where you end the story and they kiss or something. And when they're kissing, Logan gives her a wedgie and she's into it or something. In the end,
Yeah.
everybody's happy. Um, but I mean, it's so open. It's hard to say. Like, does she go to school? And it seems like she probably does. She probably meets some people. Maybe she meets some hot bullies who pick on her. Yeah, but it's kind of so open, and like New York would have to be key, I think. Try to, I don't know. Do you make it like a TV series? It's kind of worthy of the name. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if it is another tough story to figure this out for because
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
there's in the grand scheme of it so little. Um,
mm,
and it's kind of funny that we've covered so many of stories like that that barely have anything. um, I
mm-hmm.
think having at
Yeah,
least some legitimate interaction between Anne and Logan would be great, not just having Logan be
yep,
mute the entire time and sitting
yeah.
posted up against the wall, slouching and just doing shrugging his shoulders, smirking, whatever.
Shrugging his shoulders. Yeah, it was a very handsome smirk or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because we get that like male gaze thing we were talking about, but it's female gaze. It's like Logan is literally he doesn't get to talk. He's not a human being. He's just like a hot body
It's
that
like a
she gets to
cardboard
admire at this
cutout.
point. It's cardboard cutout, exactly right. That's all we get of Logan. It's like why is she into him? Like
Yeah.
other than he's there. And it's always like the story case of like oh the best friend of the brothers. They get together with him. It's awkward because he's my best friend's brother, and like it doesn't feel like kind of revolutionary in that way. But certainly, I assume we'd see more of him probably.
Yes.
But to start it off and like oh, I'm so into him, but he's literally does nothing. It's like oh okay, I guess you like the strong silent types. I don't
Yeah,
know.
you got pretty boring taste
Opposite
there,
of her
Anne.
brother, I guess. Yeah, yeah. Likes the opposite of her brother though, who keeps talking and picks on her. It's
Won't
like
leave her
someone who
alone.
kind of doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Um. Well. Yeah. Yeah. Properly introducing Henry's other roommate would
Yeah,
also be something worthwhile, as he's mentioned briefly and never actually brought into the story. Like, he never even shows up in the story except
yeah,
as a mention of this is one of the people Henry's living with. That's it.
yeah,
I think something else that could happen is Anne could explore Manhattan,
yes,
possibly meet up with some of the people she had started to go close to in Brooklyn. You know, maybe one of them has a friend in Manhattan that Anne can spend some time with to get away from her
yeah,
brother and his friends. Like something like that would open up. I guess it would really give so many avenues for the story to explore.
yeah. Really does.
Yeah, yeah. It's just another story that is so open that it's hard to pinpoint specific things that would actually happen because we don't get enough in order to determine what would make sense and what wouldn't. So, an an idea that I've come around to very recently is looking at all the unfinished stories on Lucky Fetish in a positive light rather than a negative one. Where before, and still to some
Okay.
degree, I
Yeah,
was looking at them as simply unfinished and disappointing because of that, because of being
yeah,
unfinished. Now I see them much more as open doors to worlds previously unknown to us that we as readers can explore and populate however we want, which arguably
sure.
raises engagement and investment.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Totally. I mean, certainly if it's only one part, really short, Al Manhattan, one wedgie, and it's not like the most super detailed, super long wedgie. It feels hard to keep coming back to it, and the numbers seem to point to it not being like the most engaging story compared to one that's like continued over time. In my experience, the kind of sporadically continued stories where you don't know when it's going to continue, so you keep checking back constantly because it could be any day, it could be a week, it could be longer
Are you speaking to
before it's
me here?
continued. Yeah, no, totally. That's an example of it. But I was thinking
Oh,
especially
I
of
know.
Lucy and Daniela, and I looked at other stories. I put them out weekly, but then I think of how that one came out. It was kind of just out of nowhere, parts coming whenever. I think that people were maybe coming back to it kind of regularly. Like, is it continued? Is it
Right.
continued today? And like, because you don't know. Whereas if you know it's a week, you're like, oh, I'll have to go back to it until the next week, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Uh, so certainly, yeah, in terms of that kind of engagement, it's hard when you just have one part. Certainly, yeah, it's I think interesting and fun to look at unfinished stories and not be like, oh, how could they do that to us? That sucks. But certainly look at it at what's there and say, yeah, where could this have gone and how can this maybe inspire me instead of just sort of disregarding it and going, oh, it's unfinished. Let's not talk about it. It's only one part. I mean, your podcast has been great for elevating those types of stories. They're super common, as we've pointed out multiple times, right? The heist, which we just spoke about, and others. And certainly, I would think the most of the stories you've chatted about, mine excluded, are these unfinished ones.
Yeah.
Ones like Karate Friends and things like that. Two Worlds is finished. That's another. It's cool because you've kind of done both. You've done these finished ones that are well known, but also a lot of the underknown, unfinished ones that like Anno Manhattan only has like less than 4,000 views, and we look on stories on DA. They're posted a week ago or whatever. They have more than 5K views, stuff like that. So, and this was posted back in 2015. So it's nice to be able to find these gems. The quality of their gemliness is up to debate, obviously, but certainly these ones that are hidden and not super well known. But interesting to me on Manhattan, like I said, especially because we get a male in a story and he's not just dominating her as like a sexual dom character. And the fact that it is so super, super, super open while we still get a clear focus like on Anne and also Henry, and it's really quick and it's kind of the surface level stuff. But it's a fine setup. Like I would certainly come back to this story and I would
Mhm.
read it, or I would speculate about where it's gonna go. And like I would 100% if they continue this today, Faisal, I'd read it. I want to see where Anne goes from here. I'm really curious.
Absolutely, yeah. But I don't see it happening. So it's
Yeah,
unfortunate, but
unfortunately.
we're left to our
Unfortunately.
imaginations. You said
Yeah.
before when discussing Lucy and Daniela that whatever we come up with in our minds will be way better than what the writer could create. And I think that
Yeah.
applies here, though, in a pretty literal sense. In those cases, the writers either haven't come up with anything or haven't released what they've thought up. So it's legitimately impossible for anyone to imagine something happening that's worse than nothing if they try at all.
True. True. Yeah, with the obvious exception that it is just absolutely terrible, right? Like it's so bad. You're like, I would rather have nothing than this, but the chances of that happening are very rare, especially if the story's worth reading through it, especially if you got through it and you enjoyed it. There's a good chance it's certainly gonna be better than nothing, unless it becomes some very bizarre thing where I can't even think of something because anything I could think of off the top of my head I might be like, oh, that might be interesting. Like I was
Yeah,
gonna say some
exactly.
slasher thing that was super gory, but that might even be kind of fun and wild if she gets hunted or something. I have no idea. Like it could be anything. But certainly, yeah, in almost every case, you're 1,000,000% right, and I agree.
Well,
Uh,
a-
better than nothing is great, 100%.
and I mean, it would even make sense because she's in New York, which is historically a very dangerous city to live in. It's very common for
Yeah,
crime to happen. So
it's
it would
true.
make sense
Yeah,
if she was like getting mugged or something.
yeah, yeah. It's so true.
Yeah. And now for the segment of the show, which Earth. As a refresher, I'll just
Fantastic
quickly lay
point.
them out again. So, when discussing realism in stories, I have a question I like to pose. Out of the four Earths I'm about to describe, which do you believe Anno Manhattan falls under? So, you have realistic Earth, where Earth is normal as we live it every day. Alternate Earth, where Earth is changed to some degree, mainly focusing on wedgies. Idealistic Earth, where Earth is changed to fit the desires of the wedgie community, or some aspect of it, depending on the writer. Or fantastical Earth, where Earth is changed to be unrecognizable, like Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons. And it can be a mix of those four. It can change between them, or it can be none at all and be something entirely different.
Yeah. What do you want to go first, or should I go
Yeah.
first?
I think it's pretty. I think it falls pretty solidly under realistic Earth.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no
It's
argument here.
yeah. It's if you read the story, it should be pretty evident. Um, but yeah, I mean, nothing that happens in the story really is uh really falls out of bounds of real life realism. So
Yeah.
that might be one of the
No,
easiest.
certainly.
Might be the easy
Yeah,
one of the easiest that we've
definitely. One of the
had to come
easiest
up
and
with.
one of the most realistic ones that we've read. There's no crazy over the top wedgies. There's nothing super out of place. Like they're going in a little car trip for most of the story, and then the other part of it is a brother picking on their sister. And the dialogue isn't too crazy. There's no one like talking even about wedgies or anything like that. You see, it's very 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 realistic. One of the most realistic we've chatted about, I think.
Yeah.
Interestingly.
Hmm. Absolutely. Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss?
No, I think you nailed it. I think it's worth coming back to this story, those who haven't read it,
Yes,
on Lucky Fish
absolutely.
forums and reading it. I like the very basic chapter title, New Home. I like that there was a date, although I'm curious, like, why there's no year. And I assume it's supposed to be set 2015, but there's no year, so I don't know. It was unclear to me. Um, I mean, interestingly, like the story's posted August 18th, I guess, originally, probably, because you said
Aug
2 days later the new
17th.
one was coming out.
It was
So
posted the
maybe,
17th
yeah, maybe
originally.
that's just why they picked the date. But if that was gonna have some kind of effect, the dates and the timing, since they mention everything down to like it's 2 o'clock at one point. Like I don't know if time's gonna play some factor into it. Oh, I enjoyed the story. I'm glad we got to go back through it. I'm glad we got to talk about, like we said, a pretty unknown piece.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. I kind of imagine it's just like another piece of media that's like the year is 20XX or whatever. So that's kind of my thought on it. But yeah, I
Interesting.
think you hit it on the head with it is a hidden gem. It's just another hidden gem that I think deserves a lot more recognition than it gets, and so that's why it's featured on this podcast.
Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah. Something pretty off topic. That I wanted to save until the end is something I heard this week from Faijinho, coincidentally, was about big casts and stories. Essentially, that it builds out the world to some degree to have random named characters strewn about. So, if one of your protagonists goes somewhere, it's not just a blank, empty space, and
Hmm.
they should stay as side characters with the focus on the protagonist. I mean, you have like
Sure.
a great example of this is Harry Potter. There are tertiary characters aplenty there, ones
Yeah.
who sometimes pop up in a group setting. And really, I love this thought because it's something I've had in my mind for a while now about world building, but I couldn't think of how to put to words. I think
Yeah.
it really uh, makes the world feel more like it's breathing, more alive when your protagonist goes somewhere
Absolutely.
and they're greeted by another character or overhear a snippet of their conversation or observe them doing something.
Yeah. That's such a great point. Certainly. I mean, fantasy has that in abundance where everywhere you go you're going to meet some other character who ideally are going to help further the plot, but also be of in fantasy, especially of a different race, of a different creator culture, etc. And that's going to help build the world and show different perspectives, and probably in most fantasy cases be some kind of lens or metaphor for the world. And certainly in like Stephen King, who I love, stories are full of minor characters who are maybe even in the case of The Stand, one of the best books ever written, who every human being should read. There's so many characters who are killed off constantly. Like even in the beginning when you're setting up, spoiler alert for those who don't know, the story's about a plague that wipes out 99% of humanity. Early on in that story, he rattles through a bunch of random people who we're never going to see and just how they died. And like even if they survive the initial plague, just stuff they do and how they die after and just stuff that happens. And then obviously you have a very large cast of characters who aren't that obviously sort of throwaway dead group who have lots of different perspectives, who are meeting with each other or maybe not. And you really do get a sense of this world that's left and who's left and how they all feel and what they all think. Certainly, they're not all the same level. Like, not everybody's Harry Potter in that example. And Stephen King, obviously, good friends with J.K. Rowling and loved the Harry Potter books, interestingly, too. But certainly, everywhere you go, there's someone you can look at, and they all feel real. And that's how you make your world feel real if you
Hmm.
populate it with real characters. And the more
Absolutely.
you do that, the better it is. So if you just say, "Oh, we went to a store," and you don't name the store, and you don't give the store any history, and you don't give it any people who they interact with who feel interesting and new and have their own stories, it's gonna feel flat. It's gonna be like a painting that's all one color. You got to keep adding to it, and you got to say, "Oh, but this store owner's been here X number of years." And I mean, Shadow and I tried to kind of do that a bit in stories like Dulling a Knife, for example, where the sheriff has some backstory. We give you a bit of detail on like who the bartenders are. It's not the great example, um, but that's something we were looking to do. Is like if you meet anybody, it feels like they're all a person and they're all real.
Yeah.
And I know for Stephen King, quickly to continue that digression, he was inspired by like Charles Dickens, who would do that, and London, his London that he wrote stories like Oliver Twist. It felt so real to Stephen King, and it feels real to readers now. That's kind of why we read them still, because everybody in it feels super real, and like you can meet them on the street, and they would be breathing characters really. So the more of that you can add in, I think that's always gonna be great. I love that in stories. I think it's awesome. That's I think speaks to what you were mentioning about wanting to see Ryan, wanting to see more of Logan. It's
Hmm.
like that would have just added so much more to the story to get a lot more of them. Same as the parents. We get a little bit about the parents, and I already latched onto that as you saw, and how much I was like, but what's their deal? Like, what's going
Right.
on with the parents? Like, I got a tiny bit. I got that taste. I want a lot more. I want to see them,
Yeah.
and I want them to be real, big time.
Yeah, but you want to be careful not to fall into I guess the sort of style of Hideo Kojima, yeah, in things like uh, Death Stranding, where you have to
Yeah.
divert entirely from the story to explain everything about something that doesn't it has some
Yeah.
relevance, but it's not that important. Or like the Final Fantasy VII remake, where you just completely
Mm,
stop the story to divert into a full chapter of another character's backstory. Like, come on now,
yeah.
that's a bit overindulgent. But yeah, it absolutely
Yeah,
helps when
certainly can be.
those
Yeah.
those little tiny
Yeah.
details that you don't really think about much are they can make or break a story.
Totally. It's so hard. It's so hard. Like another quick Stephen King example is a story he wrote, I think mostly on drugs, called The Tommy Knockers, which
Mm,
is considered one of his worst books and certainly not one of my favorites. But there's like this really minor character who's kind of immune to the weird stuff that's going on for a particular reason. And there's a not a huge amount of time, but there's a fair bit of time spent on him and what he's doing in his life and stuff he does and his relationship with his mom. And I read that and I go like, yeah, like that's a reason I do like that book, cuz like there's those tiny characters who we kind of digress from the main story, but not too far. It's not
Right.
like he's clearly involved in some of the action. He gets involved in what's the main thing, without giving away spoilers. But he's not a main character. He's not at all near the main characters, like at all. It's an example, kind of like in the stand of like what someone else is doing, and obviously in things like Under the Dome, we see this when a dome comes down on a town, and it's like how's everybody reacting to it, and what are some examples of what's happening. So you're not just like, oh, I don't feel it. You really feel like trapped in that dome, or you feel
Yeah.
affected by the plague, and you're like, wow, this feels like exactly what the world would be like if the world ended in the stand. So it's definitely a very hard balance. It's very hard to do, to give a lot of weight and make the world feel real without digressing. And it's
Absolutely.
probably something I would super struggle with because I love to digress, as you know, and love to go off and be like, and here's an 8-page paragraph on this one character who's got nothing to do with anything. It's like, but that's just takes me out of it. And now I'm bored and the immersion's ruined.
Yeah.
So it's really hard. But if you can do it right, you're going to add a lot to your story
Hmm.
and you're going to make it all feel more real.
Absolutely. Is there anything you'd like to promote?
Listen to the previous episode of the Best Book Club if you haven't, because we're probably going to be seeing some very interesting wedgie stories set in a shared universe of war and mechs and superheroes, which still doesn't have a name. And you're probably going to want to know what all those stories are about. And what's
Yeah.
that? What the deal is there?
Yeah. Uh, Make sure you check out Hans' 3 stories that he put out.
Yes, they're all out.
Yes, yes,
And
they're
vote. Vote on which one you want to see continued.
yes. So vote for all 3.
Yeah,
Then Hans has to continue
it's
them all,
true.
and he'll be busy for a
Or I'll
while.
just have to figure out which one to do first
Yeah.
and make my way through them.
Well, there ends another wild discussion with Hans Gutherson. Thank you so much for coming on.
So glad to be on always.
Yes, it's always fantastic to have you. Now, if there's anything that you'd like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as New Fetora. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.